Calls, my friends, for the Supreme Court to step in and stop the deluge of judges overstepping their judicial boundaries is growing. And even Republican senators have weighed in, announcing plans to introduce legislation to strip the courts of their abilities in some cases to invoke national injunctions. And Trump himself is weighing into the mix, firing off a long social media post on Truth Social against this judicial activism, calling for the Supreme Court to get off their butts and actually do something about this growing crisis. Here's what Trump wrote. He said, "Unlawful nationwide injunctions by radical left judges could very well lead to the destruction of our country. These people are lunatics who do not care even a little bit about the repercussions from the very dangerous and incorrect decisions and ruling. Lawyers endlessly search the United States for these judges and file lawsuits as quickly as they find them. It is then the obligation of law-abiding agencies of government to have these orders overturned. The danger is unparalleled. These judges want to assume the powers of the presidency without having to obtain 80 million votes. They want all of the advantages but none of the risks. Again, a president has to be allowed to act quickly and decisively about such matters as returning murderers, drug lords, rapists, and other types of criminals back to their homeland or to other locations that will allow our country to be safe. It is our goal to make America great again, and such a high aspiration can never be done if radical and highly partisan judges are allowed to stand in the way of justice. Stop nationwide injunctions now before it is too late. If Justice Roberts and the United States Supreme Court do not fix this toxic and unprecedented situation immediately, our country is in very serious trouble." Now, I want to share with you this opinion piece on the New York Post, where they title the article, "Enough is Enough. SCOTUS Slap Down These Delusional Judges and Let Trump Get to Work." Betsy, who wrote this article, writes, "Who should have more power, the President of the United States or a federal district judge? One of nearly 700 in a courthouse anywhere in the nation? The answer is obvious and pure common sense. The president is elected by millions, empowered by the U.S. Constitution to ensure, quote, the laws be faithfully executed, end quote, conduct foreign policy, and command the nation's armed forces. Most district court judges get there because they know somebody who knows somebody in the president's party. The role on the bench is generally limited to deciding the case before them based on existing law. And yet, across the country, highly partisan district judges are using legal ploys to bulldoze Trump, stymie his agenda, and set national and even international policy. In dozens of cases since January 20th, federal district judges, the lowest on the ladder, have issued nationwide injunctions halting Trump's suspension of foreign aid, his deportation of Transgender and MS-13 gang members, his layoffs and spending cuts in federal departments and agencies, his prohibitions on discriminatory diversity programs in higher education and government hiring, and more. On Tuesday, U.S. District Judge Anna Reyes in Washington, D.C. issued a nationwide injunction barring the Pentagon from enforcing Trump's January 27th executive order excluding transgender individuals from the military. Reyes said that she foresees a heated public debate and appeals. But Emperor Reyes is taking it upon herself to decide the issue for the entire nation, in defiance of the commander-in-chief who actually heads the military before any evidence is heard. She is freezing in place a policy that the president opposes for all the months and years it might take for the lawsuit to be decided and for appeals to be made, perhaps all the way to the Supreme Court. Ridiculous, Betsy writes. The misuse of national injunctions by politically motivated federal judges is not an entirely new problem, nor is it 100% one-sided. During Trump's first term, they were used 64 times to delay his initiatives. They were also 14 times against the Biden administration per Harvard Law Review survey. All the more reason the Supreme Court should crack down without delay. Justice Elena Kagan has sharply criticized this abuse, saying it just can't be right that one district judge can stop a nationwide policy in its tracks and leave it stopped for the years it takes to go through the normal process. During the first Trump administration, Kagan observed that activist judges used to go to the Northern District of California, and in the Biden years they would go to Texas shopping for a judge willing to issue a national injunction in line with the plaintiff's wishes. Her comments came as a district judge for the Northern District of Texas imposed a nationwide injunction ordering the Food and Drug Administration to withdraw its approval of mifepristone, an abortion drug. How can a single judge in a small courthouse in Amarillo have such power? Angry abortion activists demanded. Good question, Betsy writes. Until the Supreme Court acts, Trump is caught in an arduous game of whack-a-mole, pleading with federal appeals courts all over the nation to overturn the endless injunctions and get his stalled policy initiatives up and running. It's one victory at a time. Last week, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit lifted the freeze on Trump's executive order, ending discriminatory DEI rules in government contracting, grant-making, and hiring. But lefty district court judges are still waging lawfare against Trump, and the High Court isn't doing its job. On March 5th, a divided Supreme Court turned down Trump's request to lift a district court order compelling the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development to pay $2 billion in foreign aid in defiance of the president's policies. Justice Samuel Alito issued a blistering dissent, saying, "Does a single district court judge have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion taxpayer dollars?" The answer to that question should be an emphatic no. And Trump's acting Solicitor General Sarah Harris is undeterred, though. On March 13th, she made an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court, warning that these injunctions have reached epidemic proportions. This brand of lawfare stops the executive branch from performing its constitutional powers, she argued. And she made her request within the context of the birthright citizenship case, now before the court. Yet another Trump choice that has been judicially handcuffed. But the court, Betsy writes, needs to do more than weigh in on Trump's policies on children born to illegal residents. It is time, past time, to restrain these district court judges who act like kings. Harris called it a modest request, but in fact, the progress of Trump's entire agenda and the hopes of Americans who voted for him depend on it. As Harris told the court, enough is enough. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this story with you is that I believe that Betsy is correct here. This is an epidemic. This is a crisis. The Supreme Court needs to get off their moldy old butts here and do something about this before these injunctions by these lowly district court judges reach epic proportions. They need to act because the way that the court system is designed is to take its sweet time. And most of the time, the Supreme Court hides behind this. District court judges, my friends, were never, ever intended to wield national injunction powers. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution limits federal courts to resolving cases or controversies, meaning disputes between specific parties. A district court's job is to settle the fight in front of them, not to dictate policy for the entire nation. When you have corrupt judges like Boasberg, who blocks Trump's Alien Enemies Act deportations nationwide, not only was he illegally ruling on how the president could use the Alien Enemies Act, which, by the way, he has no jurisdiction in, but on top of that, he didn't just rule for the plaintiffs involved in the suit. He issued a nationwide blanket order that affected millions of people outside of the immediate courtroom. So rather than the couple hundred people being sent off to the super jail, to the mega jail, he ruled that all deportations had to stop. That is a massive leap from adjudicating a case to rewriting executive action everywhere. There is nowhere in the Constitution where it is written that a lowly district court judge, a federal court judge, it has that kind of power. These activist judges are taking massive power grabs in an attempt to stall or even thwart Donald Trump. When you have a judge like Boasberg, who can halt Trump's Alien Enemies Act deportations nationwide, they are not just settling a local fight, they are acting like unelected super legislatures. This is incredible, massive overreach, and it's not in their job description. The framers of our country gave Congress and the president, who are accountable to voters, national authority, not some lone little federal judge with political aspirations and leanings. I mean, think about this. There are 94 district courts and over 600 judges. Any one of these guys can issue a nationwide injunction. It's just begging for chaos. Nationwide injunctions let plaintiffs, who are often activist groups, pick a friendly judge and paralyze the entire administration, the entire country, with their actions by doing national injunctions. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. Trump has now faced over 60 injunctions already, which dwarfs Obama's 12 in his entire 8-year administration. This is untenable. And I want to point one more thing out. Up until the 21st century, here in the US, nationwide injunctions were very, very rare. This is a new phenomena brought on by activist judges who are being installed by political parties with this very purpose in mind. The Supreme Court was concerned about this growing influence. Justice Thomas, back in 2018, in the Trump versus Hawaii case, called these rulings troubling overreach and hinted that they undermined the equitable system of the courts. And you even had the liberal Justice Ginsburg, who worried at the time about their scope. Lower courts in this country used to understand their role and mostly stuck to their lane. But now they are drunk on power, and worse still, the pace of these rogue, corrupt judges issuing nationwide injunctions is accelerating. Let's go back to the 1980s with Ronald Reagan. During his first term, there were just 3 nationwide injunctions issued. Okay, that's 4 years, 3 injunctions. During Donald Trump's first term, when it was Russia, 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 Hitler, 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 hoax, 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 there were 19 injunctions. But now in 2025, in just the first 2 months of Trump's second term, there are dozens of injunctions already. This is an issue that must be fixed, or else this country will fall into chaos. Because eventually we're going to reach a boiling point where enough will be enough, and presidents will just begin to ignore courts, causing a true constitutional crisis. And I believe that the fix is rather simple. You just put these lower federal courts judges back in their place. Let's take the corrupt Judge Boasberg and his Alien Enemies Act ruling on deportations with the Venezuelans. Let's keep it simple. If he wants to put a stop to deportations to Venezuelans in a very specific case, that's one thing. Just do not allow him to do that for the whole country. Let the appeals court be the ones who broaden the injunction if needed. But really, only the Supreme Court should have the power of national injunctions. They are the only ones who are really built for such a role. There is a desperate need to end this dark practice of lowly federal judges issuing nationwide injunctions. If we can cut them off at the knees here, it won't gut judicial power. What it would do, though, it would force Congress or the Supreme Court to start handling more of the big stuff, not just relying on some random black-robed activist with a gavel and a grudge to issue their rulings on this country, to force their will upon the American people. If we end national injunctions in lower courts, you will cut all the chaos out without breaking the system. But failure to do so, failure to fix this chaos, will end up resulting in tyranny, either through corrupt judges who will just wield their will against the American people, or presidents who will eventually just say, to hell with these judges, and just throw out their rulings. Something must be done about all of this. And time, my friends, I don't think is on our side here.